Modems. Dial-up sounds. The nostalgia is high. Back in the 90s, modems, or modulators, demodulators, were used to access the internet. In fact, they'd been in commercial use since the 1950s, but were never really an essential household item until the World Wide Web was created by British scientist Tim Berners-Lee in 1989. The Unix-based Urwise became the first commonly introduced browser in 1992, which was followed by a string of more familiar programs, some of which are used to this day. Well, by the odd person, at least. We'll cover the history of modems in another episode, but today's task is to connect up to the internet using dial-up and find out whether it's still usable through this outmoded transmission method. This is a very special item. It's my original modem from 1997, complete with 1990s T-stains. It's actually a Trust 33.6k model, meaning only 33,600 bits of data can be received per second. That's 4.2 kilobytes of data, or a JPEG, that looks like this. And even then we're talking best case scenario. But still, getting this back then opened up a whole world of new GIFs, or GIFs, whatever you want to call them, dodgy internet sites, and BT wireplay. In 1998, the popular 56k modem was released, allowing a 7 kilobytes per second download speed, but still only 4.2 kilobytes for uploads. And for most people, this was the best dial-up speeds they experienced. So this is what we'll be testing. The modem I had intended to use, this Intel 537EP variant, refused to play ball with Windows 98 on my Dell Precision 360 Pentium 4 machine. So, a quick trip to Amazon yielded this compact PCI Connexant device. After fiddling with a few drivers, hey presto, we are back in the 90s. So, first things first, we have to connect the modem to the phone socket. Handily, we don't even have to disrupt my DSL internet connection, as modems use the same analog frequencies as a telephone. That's what all those ZX Spectrum-like hissing and whirring sounds are, and also why we're limited to such slow speeds. This does mean, however, that like the 90s, you can't use the phone whilst connected. Oh well. I guess I'll have to rely on my mobile. If anyone rings, that is.
I'm so lonely.
As you can imagine, dial-up providers of the past have long gone, so we'll be using the Freola service for our needs. Yes, there are still dial-up providers available for the most rural of locations. And they operate on a pay-as-you-go method, billed to your phone bill. This is much like providers such as Extreme Internet back in the 90s, although you now pay 2p per minute rather than the 10p per minute which my parents discovered to their horror back in 1997. A generic username does the deed and we are in. So, let's go surfing. The outdated browsers compatible with Windows 98 don't really allow us to load up modern sites, but with the use of kernel EX we can trick the 11.64 version of Opera browser into believing it's running on an XP machine, and achieve a fairly coherent level of browsing. So, first up, here's the speed test I conducted using my broadband. My connection is roughly 40 megabits per second, and this holds true on my Windows 10 machine. However, this setup seems to bottleneck it at 2.8 megabits. But matter not, this will provide us with a reasonable measuring base. Using dial-up, well, it takes a while. At first I didn't think it would even load the test, but it does, and after it finishes, it reports a download speed of 0, an upload speed of 0, and one hell of a ping time. So how about a timed test? A simple site like msn.com loads in just under 5 seconds, which seems reasonable for a 350 kilobyte per second connection. Using dial-up, well, we get the thoroughly mawkish little computer icon in the taskbar and a considerable wait. Not only does this mean we have an image of Brad Pitt almost bearing his nips on our screen for a good while, it also means we have to wait just over 2 minutes and 50 seconds for all the page elements to load. Now, we actually managed to connect to Friola at 45,333 bits per second, or roughly 5.6 kilobytes per second, which is 62 times slower than our broadband connection, but the page only loaded 34 times slower, so we're doing pretty well based on pure transmission speed. Of course, we're not factoring in translation speed, rendering, caching, and so forth, so this feels about right, as you may have predicted. Let's try a more complicated site, like bbc.co.uk. So here's our broadband connection, and it clocks in at just over 10 seconds, about double MSN's time. From that you could ascertain that loading the same page on dial-up should take just under 6 minutes. Now, we could sit here all day musing on the slow motion loading we're witnessing, with unformatted text loading first, followed by the layout and formatting afterwards. Or we could just skim over some headlines about dinners and terror. But really,
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Truth be told, I abandoned the BBC site at this stage before 5 minutes was even up, because it's evident that using dial-up in this day and age is just ridiculous. For better or worse, the internet is no longer a lean collection of lightweight images, 4-frame animations and text. It's now a monstrous place of massive images, complex formatting and excessive bandwidth. Even my own website, which loaded fine on broadband, was just filled with such disdain for dial-up that my server just gave up on sending data and the site failed to load at all. Opera even tried to help out at one point by switching its turbo mode on. This streamlines websites down to their bones, leaving sites such as YouTube looking like this. But helpful as it may be if you're really out in the sticks, this isn't really a workable solution. Now you might ask, other than for nostalgia, why didn't I just conduct this experiment on my Windows 10 machine? Well, as it happens, I gave it a whirl. You can pick up 56k USB modems like this one, cheap enough, and establishing a dial-up connection under Windows 10 is a simpler task than it ever was. But modern browsers were simply not happy with the arrangement. Sure, I could have tweaked the settings to improve loading, but it's still like trying to wedge a train into a pipe, even after turning off all the applications which are constantly talking across the net in this day and age. One thing that has remained fairly consistent, however, is Google. It worked on my Nokia WAP experiment, and its simple interface means loading is fairly quick even under dial-up. But really, for the true experience, you need to head on over to the Wayback Machine and load up a proper search engine like Alta Vista. Due to the Wayback Machine overhead, even this takes a while, but it's worth it just for that RAM-packed 90s layout alone. Oh, good times Alta Vista, good times indeed. Now, where are the 90s cat animations?